Welcome back to Cultured Boy, where we are exploring modern culture through the lens of an ex-cult member. That's me. I'm Calvin. I'm the Cultured Boy. Today we're talking about the Renee Nicole Good situation. I'm going to keep this episode as real and unpolished as I can take it and stand it, because I think especially this sort of thing warrants that. It's been several days now that the incident happened. I'll give context on it before we jam, but somebody lost their life, and we have all the time in the world to edit things and get our perfect takes and stuff like that. And it's so fucking easy to Monday morning quarterback this thing. But I want to share some things that I've noticed around this, depending on what side of the political spectrum you're on and that sort of thing. If this is your first time seeing me, please hit the subscribe button, like and comment. I appreciate the conversation. I'm new to this whole conversation YouTube game, and I want to do it more and more. Okay, so let's set a couple context. I'll give context for the Renee thing, and then a little bit of context for me, and we'll dive in. So, of course, if you're living anywhere in America, perhaps around the world, there's this situation that happened a few days ago. It's insane. It actually feels like that it's been 2 weeks. Like, that's how much this has been consuming my waking thoughts. But literally it just happened a few days ago, like 4 days ago as of right now, on the 7th, and today's the 11th. So Renee Good gets shot and killed by an ICE officer. I'm going to just start there because that's where the conversation really begins. And there are just certain things about this that show us so much about who we are as a culture that I think is really interesting. So how this is going to be different from other analysis of it is, first of all, I want to make it more personal. I want to be honest about what my process was as the information unfolded was, because I went on a little bit of a roller coaster with this as information came in. There's also something that I've noticed with people, how they reacted to it, depending on what side of the political spectrum they happened to land on. Okay, so we're going to dive into that. So just a little bit of context for me and why my brain is wired the way that it is to look at all angles and update my worldview depending on that information. So I grew up in what many would call a cult. Now, of course, everybody pretty much calls it a cult except the people that, when you're in it, it's a very shameful thing to be considered, honestly. So I'm trying to find out better ways of even communicating it. But for all intents and purposes, if this is your first time seeing me, it was essentially a cult. So I grew up, I call myself Mormon. So you've heard of Mormonism, and everybody knows a Mormon or of Mormons, or they've heard of the Book of Mormon musical. There's all these jokes around Mormonism, like soaking, like strange belief systems. There are there are the temples that some people know. Joe Rogan always talks about how Mormons are the nicest people. They're so nice, and there is some truth to that, although not nice in the way that I appreciate. So I grew up in Utah most of my life. I'm here in New York City now, but I grew up on a farm. I milked a cow every morning. I split wood, me and my brothers. I have a big family. I have 22 sisters, 22 brothers. I think I'm getting the math right on that. I need to actually confirm that. I have 44 siblings. and I think it's split. I think there's one more boy than there are girls. Even split. Now, how is that possible? How does anybody have 44? And again, the only reason I bring this up is I think it's important to understand the mind that you're listening to or watching this on, because I know what it's like to be ideologically locked into something. I also know what it looks and feels like when things are ideologically locked, and there's a lot of that happening right now all around in this case. But yeah, to make a long story short, I was always curious growing up. Now, I've also been on a journey with how I even describe my past, because when you leave something like this, there's this whole world on the other side of religion, on the other side of cultiness, where it's just too easy to just be like, oh, I went through all these hard things. And it's not to downplay things, because there were legitimate things that were horrifying, hard, and not good about my upbringing. But of course, it's also not that. It's not that black and white. And I find this interesting because I grew up in an environment where everything was black and white. Everything was seemingly black and white. And I then step into the real world, quote unquote, thinking that I'm leaving all forms of binary thinking and black and white thinking, and I'm leaving cultiness. I think I just went to the source of it all, is really what it feels like now. But again, I'll put a pin on that just to wrap up the context here. So, of my 44 siblings, now how do 44 siblings happen and stuff like that with Mormonism? Okay, what most people don't know is Mormonism is a big umbrella. There is a reason that there are jokes to this day of why, a lot of people say, are Mormons, how many wives do you have, and stuff like that. And if most current modern day Mormons squirm at that, they're like, what do you mean? Like, or don't say that, like, we're not polygamous anymore, that was just something for a time, yada yada yada. And that's partially true. So regular modern day Mormons are not polygamists. The official doctrine of the LDS Church, the Latter-day Saint Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, does not practice polygamy. But they used to. Not only did they practice it, but it was one of the most ardently defended belief system, like part of the whole structure. It was considered one of the crowning principles of the entire thing. That the founder, Joseph Smith, he had multiple wives, and other prophets and people after them had multiple wives. And not only was it permissible, it was commanded. And so it was turned into this thing that you must accept and live this way because God commands it. Now, why would he command it? Because that's how God lives. That's the narrative. That's how God lives. And that's how you get to heaven, not just any heaven, but the highest heaven. There's like 3 tiers of heaven in Mormonism. There's the telestial kingdom, terrestrial kingdom, and the celestial kingdom. And to get to the highest heaven, you must be willing to accept polygamy. And then, by the way, all this will tie back in a sec, I promise. And then, of course, that's not sustainable, ultimately. The prophet of Mormonism, the founder of Mormonism, gets murdered, and there's a new prophet, Brigham Young, and they need to go somewhere. and they were in Missouri at the time, and they go out west and they land in Utah, and that's where Mormonism really gets its roots, is in Utah. And in Mormon history, this is where I'm coming into the picture in a sec, is when Mormons landed in Utah, they weren't a state yet. Utah was not yet a state. It was a territory, the territory of Deseret. And they wanted to become a part of the Union, but the government and the church, really, which was one of the same at the time, so we're talking late 1800s, they didn't have a good relationship, like the people of Deseret, the Utah people, and the federal government, because of the whole polygamy thing. And not only was Utah having struggles to become a state, they actually started to be persecuted by the federal government because of the whole polygamy practices and stuff like that. So they're like, yo, if you're ever going to consider this, you got to change your ways, man. Like, polygamy is so, like, that feels akin to slavery. We're past that now. Like, yeah, we need to be done with it. And it was a personal thing for a lot of people, because it took them a long time to believe it, because at first they didn't, and they kept being like, yo, what is this? What is this? Like, do we obey the laws of the land, or the laws of man, or the laws of God? And it got more and more contentious, to the point to where the federal government actually started to prosecute people out in the Utah area for living polygamy and stuff like that. There were court cases. And out of nowhere, seemingly, like, suddenly the prophets of the Mormon church got this quote-unquote revelation that polygamy was no longer required. Now, when the LDS church, the Mormon church, kicked out, or I'm getting ahead of myself with that word, but I'll keep all this in. But when the LDS church decided to do away with polygamy, they had a congregation of people that were relieved. Many of them were relieved, because they didn't want to live it. It was a difficult practice to participate in. It was certainly a relief to many of the women. However, there were people that, you know, they fought to defend it. It became a spiritual practice. Even those that struggled with it, many women that struggled to accept it, now were wanting to defend it, because their grandmother or great-grandmother was a polygamist and stuff like that, and they were taught this is how you get to the celestial kingdom. So there were people that did not shift, that they continued to live polygamy, even though that was the official stance, as it was no longer a thing. And the tensions between the federal government and Utah intensified to the point where Utah had to, or the LDS church, aka Utah, had to completely distance themselves from their members that were practicing. So what did they do? They excommunicated them. That's where I come from. So I come from a long line. I'm going to do this so that I know where the audio was, because it cut for a sec. I come from a long line of rejected people that are trying to do the right thing, essentially. But that's where polygamy kept alive. So the regular Mormon church no longer practices, but since early 1900s at least, there have been this quiet, private group of people that have continued to practice this way as the correct way to live. That's how I have 44 siblings. My grandfather had 13 wives. He had a lot of kids. One of those kids was my dad. And my dad had 4 wives and 44 kids, which, if you're doing the math, that's a lot. My moms are all troopers. They each had 11 to 13 kids each. We all grew up in one house. So I'm born in this environment, and I believe it fully. I become the first kid, and only kid, I think. I don't think anybody else has done this yet. Went to college, graduated, took a philosophy class that completely broke my brain, made me question everything. It took me a few years to question it. I was so in it. I was so believing. I had a church-assigned marriage. I ended up leaving everything. Now, I think all this context is important because of the way I'm approaching something serious like this Renee Good situation, but also just the way that I approach life at all. Because I see a lot of different, maybe different's not the word, I see a lot of similar things at play. Like we could talk for 20 hours on just the psychology of what keeps people in something like Mormonism and what keeps somebody locked into like a political party. I think this point is particularly important because of how people are receiving information. So there's this term I use, and I'm going to find it here because I wrote it down, the definition. There's this term that I use that I call narrative locked. And this showed up big time in the Renee Good situation. Narrative locked is when a person adopts a story about reality so deeply that the story becomes their filter for truth. New information is only allowed if it supports the narrative, and anything that threatens it is ignored, reframed, or dismissed. At its heart, being narrative locked means the narrative isn't just a belief, it's the baseline truth that everything else must conform to. Being narrative locked is human. I was very narrative locked when I was growing up. And the truth is, there are things about being narrative locked that are kind of tricky and scary. And that it is, we don't know sometimes that we're narrative locked. Like if I was in the religion and somebody came to me and told me that I was wrong and why I was wrong, I probably would be completely incapable of even seeing it. I bring this up because my hope, if there's anything that can come out of this particular episode, even just a seed of it, is us as a culture understanding our role in how we take in information so that we can operate effectively in the world. Now, how did this narrative lock thing work? This is what I noticed outside looking in at people. It was... So I believe that there is reality, like there's our perceptions, but then there is what is real. Like whatever happened. There, like what Einstein discovered was real, physics is real. Now there are different depths and layers of perspective, but there are things that are genuinely real and true about life and about reality. And so given that, I believe that if you have an aim to discover truth, you can get to it. And it shouldn't matter if you're a Democrat or you're a Republican or you're black or you're white or you're a woman or you're female, or if you're female or male or trans, it doesn't matter. You can get curious and find out about something. It was a little bit uncomfortable to me how predictable it was that how this situation was being interpreted, depending on their political stance. If somebody was more right-leaning, it was way too easy to say this is what happened. If somebody's left-leaning, this is what happened. So I'll just restate it for the record, because I'm sure people have seen the videos and stuff like that, but the two broad viewpoints of the situation was that Renee Good was basically gunned down by this overpowered person, like without provocation, really, or basically he killed an innocent person. He murdered her. That's one side. And then the other side is self-defense. Now, I have some comments on this whole thing, but I want to be honest about my process, because I went on a roller coaster with this one. And the journey's never over. Like, one piece of information can shift an entire perspective, I think, if you're being intellectually honest, if you're actually aiming at truth. So here's my journey when I was seeing all this. The first thing I saw is I watched the video that everybody saw. The first one that came out, which is this person that is holding the cell phone from the back of the vehicle, watches it happen and is like screaming and stuff like that. And so my first reaction is, I'm a believer in we have to treat people the way that we want to be treated. I'm not religious, but I just think that's a really good idea as a general rule. And if you have some form of power, and power can take many different forms, but even physical power, or you have guns and stuff like that, then you should be trained on how to use those things. You should be trained on how to use that power in a good way. And you can never just say, I have the power, I have the authority, therefore, blah, 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 I can do what I want, sort of thing. So I watched the video, and I was sick to my stomach. So my first reaction, my first instinct was, what the fuck is this guy's problem? This is insane. Because what I saw on that first video is this guy just pulling out his gun and shooting this person, Renee, through the windshield. And I was like, that is crazy. Why the fuck would you do that? And that was it. And maybe it was because partly too that I think there are ways that you can treat people. I know ICE's job as a rule is to sort of deport people. And so that already has this sharp kind of, I would just say, it just has this edge to it. But that's my first reaction. And then, a couple things came up. Then I see Trump's tweet. And it's basically saying that the officer got ran over. He's hospitalized. He's lucky to be alive. Self-defense. And I was like, self-defense? What is this? This is insane to me. And then I see J.D. Vance and there are these other people saying self-defense. And then I see all of these right-wing commentators, Tim Pool, there were other ones, but I just several on Twitter, they're basically calling this self-defense. I'm like, what are we talking about? And what it really felt like to me at the time is that Trump, JD, and everybody else, people that are sort of responsible for ICE, are covering their asses. That's what it seemed like. It's like, why would you do that? Somebody died. What the fuck are we doing? This is complete insanity. And then, of course, there's pandemonium, mayhem, like people are losing their minds in the street in Minnesota, like understandably so. And it just appears like there's this power-hungry authority person with a goddamn gun that just killed somebody. And she's a mother, 6-year-old son. I'm like, this is beyond heartbreaking. Then we get a new angle. So there's this new angle that's more of a zoomed out view of the front of the vehicle. And what it appears from that angle is, oh, this officer genuinely does get hit by the car. That's what it appears. Now, it's from a distance, and it is grainy, but I see that, and it's like, oh, was he actually hit? Was he actually? And I rewatched the video, and I was like, oh, see, that puts a wrinkle in this. I'm not saying it's justified, like people were saying insane things online about Renee and things like that. It's like, this is a real human being. Why are we talking about people like they're cartoon characters? But that does change things. It changes the context. It's like, is he actually being hit by the vehicle right here? Like, this is nuts. Because, yeah, that's just not good. So we're watching the grainy video, and I'm like, okay. And then the analysis comes out that where going back to the video of the original video, but people are now slow-moing it down. People are looking at the feet. People are connecting the two videos together to try to get context, which is so important. And the context makes it look like that, no, he's not being run over because his feet shift and everything. But, and then there's when I see that, it's like, yeah, he doesn't, like, and the other video is grainy, so I'm not sure. It still seems like this is just an innocent person. Like, why is she in the street? Like, was she even doing anything? Because it looks like she's just, like, I see her wave other vehicles around. She's trying to just get people to leave. Like, this is crazy. She was just, and there are these other officers that get out of the car, and they're like, get out of the car, get out of the fucking car. And she is just scared and is just trying to get away. Like, that's everything that I'm seeing. And when I see that, I'm like, no, like, everything about this is like, she doesn't look like she's being provocative. She's just trying to save herself. She's, I don't know why she's in the road. It looks like the guy could have gotten out of the way. All he needed is one extra step. And then she's killed a second later. And so I get to the point where I'm like, that's my stance with everything that I'm seeing. I was like, this is crazy. So I'm going on X and Facebook, and I'm seeing people that are just being so mean about her. And I'm like, you guys are fucking animals. This is insane. Like, this feels like what I was seeing people do that I criticized when Charlie Kirk got shot, where they're like, serves him right, serves her right, and stuff like that. I'm like, we're talking about a human. This is just crazy. And so that's where things were for a long time for me. And it was very clear, if you are more right-leaning, then you're going to be on the side of ICE and self-defense. And if you're left-leaning, you're definitely more on the side of there's this innocent person and this is what happened. And so that's what I was thinking. I was thinking she was just this innocent person, which everybody is innocent until proven guilty and everything else, but that there was no instigation. This guy overreacted. And the tragic piece was that she lost her life by this power-hungry, authority-wielding person. And then we get the cell phone footage of the ICE officer. What do we see? We see him walk around the vehicle. We see him talk to this woman who is, I guess, the wife of Renee Good. Becca Good is her name. And honestly, I see some things that I'm uncomfortable that I'm seeing, because I'm seeing some things sort of validated on the side of the right, where people are like, these guys were instigating, and she's kind of poking at ICE. Basically saying like, yeah, we don't change our plates. This is Becca Good. You should go get some lunch, big boy. And then there's the moment. From the angle, you see these ICE officers telling her to get out of the car. Becca Good goes to open the door, and she realizes she can't get in. And so you hear the officers say what they told Renee to do, which is get out of the car, get out of the fucking car. She reverses. you hear Becca Good say, "Drive, baby, drive." She does, she gets shot. Okay. Where am I at with all this context now? Here's where I'm at. This actually is way more tragic than I realized. That's my take. She shouldn't have died. That's a given. I'm still there. The uncomfortable part, and again, this is something that, like, I'm not fucking right wing, I'm not left wing. Growing up the way that I grew up, being so ideologically locked into something and having to rebuild my psyche from the ground up, I'm very, 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 very careful with what I actually think about a thing. I don't accept something just because it's on my camp, because I know how self-destructive that gets to accept something just because it's in your camp. One thing I was going to say earlier, the reason I think it's important to have an aim for truth and stuff like that is the only way you can move forward is if you're actually connected to reality. And you can't just be connected to your narrative. So I'm not saying this from a place of wanting to be on any particular political party, but I don't think anybody's saying it, at least somebody from my viewpoint that has been pretty empathetic to the whole thing. But this is what I'm saying. Becca and Renee have a huge accountability in this tragedy, is my current take. And that sucks. Meaning, they most certainly played a key role in this becoming the unfortunate fate. And that sucks. It really does. Like, I hate seeing humans are so genuinely good. Like, I get why they were there. You know, I get the sentiment that a lot of people feel. It's certainly here in New York where people are feeling fucked with. And people want to stand up for other people. And so how that is manifesting is there's this, on the left, some vigilante sounding rhetoric on standing up to ICE. Like, it's all the time. Like, I have a sticker somewhere right here that says "fuck ICE," because somebody gave it to me in a coffee shop. And I'll be honest, I kind of agree with it, because I've seen videos where ICE is being way too culty in how they're dealing with people. And I'm not a fan of getting families ripped apart. I come from that. I come from an environment where families get ripped apart for one reason or another, through religion. You know, government also ripped families apart of my ancestors, separated families when there were like polygamy crackdowns. I won't get into that. But like the things like the 40 raids in the 1940s. So I get the intent of why these people are there and wanting to stand up to ICE. I stand corrected, though, that it wasn't this thing where they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time and just there to, you know, create no issue. It's like what it seems like now is they were there to get in the way of ICE. They were in the way of, they went into a place that's lethal. And I sometimes think that we don't realize how quick things can turn. Like, look how long we've just talked, and what are we talking about? We're talking about something that took 1 second. Like, we're having all this conversation, and everybody's talking, and there's literally thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of hours, probably millions of hours of analysis collectively as human species on this one moment. There's so many things that we don't see when we're there. And as the different pieces come into play, we start to realize, okay, there's way more to this picture than I realized. But yeah, that's an uncomfortable part for me to notice, is especially watching that final body cam footage. Now, there's stuff that he said that is also very problematic. When after this car went away, he called her a bitch, like, you stupid bitch. But I can also see why. In a high tense situation like that, if he actually felt like that his life was under threat, and the car does hit him, he's like, whoa, like I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting that he actually got hit, for him to like have that terrorized freak, like, whoa. I think, do I think he could have stepped away? Sure. But again, I don't know what it'd be like to be me in that situation right there. And then the other side is, she also, Becca, did tell her to drive. And honestly, that's a key player that hasn't been talked about a whole lot in the news. Like, a lot of people were looking at this as ICE versus the person killed. But again, one of the things that I'm trying to do with the more I talk publicly is saying things as cleanly and honestly as I actually believe it to be, even if it's uncomfortable to say. And one of those things is, I think Becca has a huge reckoning in this, the wife of Renee. It really sucks. She didn't pull the trigger, but I think she helped make this situation happen. It appears she's the one that brought them there, wanted them there. She was the one that said, drive, baby, drive. And I think you see that in the initial shock and grief. Because there are these other videos right after where, and I'm not saying she should take all the blame. She definitely shouldn't. Like, it's really shitty to be anybody connected to this right now. But something that Becca Good said was, this is my fault. This is all my fault. I made her come down here. And there were several pieces in this that appear that make it look like that Renee wasn't intending major provocation. She was even telling the ICE officer, I'm not mad at you particularly. She was waving people over. The only way for this to make sense, I think you have to be out of the binary thinking. You can't say who's right and who's wrong. You have to look at it and try to actually understand what happened. And what it appears has happened, like zooming out, getting out of the fucking legalistic viewpoint and looking at this as human beings. And honestly, what helps me think about this, I was doing this earlier, imagining that everybody involved for me is a sibling. That's how I view this. Not a radical left or a radical right, left or right. Every single person in this picture is a sibling. That's how I think about it. A sibling driving the car, a sibling that's outside of the car, a sibling that's trying to do their job. And that's helpful because what it appears is ICE, first of all, ICE has done things that feel inhumane. Now, talking to ICE officers and people involved, like they believe in America, they believe that we should protect each other. There's this real sense of pride in doing something that actually matters and protecting what you care about, getting out illegals and stuff like that. Like there's a pride in that people are coming up with if you're in the ICE perspective. However, that has led to these other raids that they have done that has split families apart, that has looked not good. So what does that lead to? Well, what it leads to is a lot of people see that and they're like, fuck this. We want to resist this. And there's been several cities, New York's been one of them. It's like, okay, we're going to resist ICE. And this is for the last several months. Like I have friends here in New York that they have ICE protocol. There are people that, like, they have buttons to push. That if you walk into the place of business, if you walk into the restaurant, then it signals the people that they hide or get out of there. Like, I just know that personally. And I don't think that's from I get it from a human level. Now, is that illegal? Is that getting in the way of stuff if you're the restaurant owner? Yeah, I think so. But I also get it. I get why people would want to protect their people. So I get that viewpoint. And then the other side of it, so I get wanting to stand up for it, wanting to use your privilege, if you will, to protect people. So I get the intent of Becca Good and Renee. But again, just my sense so far with all of the videos and all I'm seeing is I actually think that the one that was the most driving force in all of this is like the one that was the most wanting to stand up and support and stand up against ISIS is Becca. And I think Renee was a supporting role in all of this. But I get it. Why they would want to. And to want to stand up for humans. And then looking at this situation, giving all of the things at play, I can see how something like this can just be completely tragic. And because they're coming to stand up against ICE, ICE is feeling increasingly fucked with. I mean, they definitely were on that street. Just on that street, there were, dozens and dozens and dozens of people, many of them screaming. And so they're already in a heightened state. And unfortunately, I can see how all this went down. Now, do I think that Renee was trying to run this guy over like that was her intent? I don't see any evidence of that. And for the first few videos, I was like, yeah, he didn't ever feel that way. He didn't ever feel afraid. But then I see the footage of him holding the phone, and I can see that he was. I can see the sound of his voice and everything else. I actually think that's why he reacted the way that he did. I think, like, even after, I think that was a terror response. Okay, how do I zoom out on this? Where are we taking this? This is what I want to do for you, the listener. I don't want to tell anybody what to think or what to believe. I actually think that's a big problem right now. It's a big problem in culture. It's what is making legacy media die. It is on its deathbed. It is on its way out. Independent thinking media is not the future, it is the present. And the reason I shared all of the story of like, this is where I'm leaning one way or the other, is I think that's how most things are. If you're being, well, I'll speak for myself. If I'm being honest. Now, there are some things where I want to lean one way or the other, but deep down, I want to aim for what is actually true. And that means completely changing completely changing my position if a new piece of information changes everything. And if you don't think a single piece of information can change everything, I mean, you haven't read enough. Because, I mean, that's what really good endings are to movies and books and stuff like that, is you think you know the whole story, and then all of a sudden the author will drop in one final nugget of information. And I don't know why, but the book that comes to mind right now is like Where the Crawdads Sing. I'm not going to spoil it, but that book just ends where like the final few sentences of that book changes the entire context of everything that you read in a single like end. So I think what I want to do is perhaps, well, there's two things I was going to touch on. I want to end on a question, something reflective for people on that are listening to this, but this is going to spark bigger conversations. We got to have bigger conversations about how we confront things that we very much disagree with. How do we deal with people like ICE? Because the question that I was going to ask people at the very beginning that were so much on the side of ICE is, well, what is your line? What is your line to where you're like, because they were using the argument as this guy has authority, he's a federal officer, and of course the famous fuck around and find out, that's been a big meme in this whole thing. Well, where's your line? I mean, the whole reason a lot of people on the right are so big on the Second Amendment is we believe that there is a line somewhere. And the right to bear arms is like a protection that you give yourself if things were to ever go too crazy. You feel like you can defend yourself for those you love. So we know there's a line. What is it? That's not my main question I was going to end with. But the argument to trust someone just because they're telling you what to do. Like I wasn't really down with she should have just followed the guy's orders and opened the door. Probably. Should be alive, more than likely. And in fact, that probably would have done a lot, because they would have recorded the whole thing and stuff like that, and would have added to the body of evidence that ICE is being aggressive. But I don't think the argument of just listening to somebody because they have authority is great advice. That's how things get really cold really quickly. And I also think that if your perspective isn't shifting as new information shifts, that is also something you got to look into with yourself. I know what it feels like too, because I grew up my entire life thinking that I had the one right true church, and even the other fundamentalist Mormon churches, even though we're 99% the same, I knew for sure that we were the ones that were the right ones. And it was because I happened to be born in that one. And if I wasn't willing to shift based on new evidence and new information, I would still be in a cult. I would still be in fundamentalist Mormonism. So I just think it's really important that we, in processes like this, yes, we're going to be analyzing information and data and perspectives. I think we should also analyze our own internal world and ask ourselves, what are our own motivations? Because one thing I've gotten so uncomfortable with over the years, and I saw it a lot here that I was deeply uncomfortable with, I am so uncomfortable with unearned certainty. And there was a lot of unearned certainty, and there still is a lot of unearned certainty of what's going on. This is the beginning of a conversation. This is not the end. Culture is going through something major right now with, how we view other people, how we view authority, how we interface with authority, what we think is right, what we think is just. But I think there is, even if you disagree with somebody, there has to be some base level of respect. Like people talk about this in like combat sports, like respecting the danger. That doesn't mean you don't fight and stuff like that, but I really do think that there was a lack of respect of what the danger was. Like people are talking to somebody with a gun that could easily kill you. Like that's just like the approach is going to have to shift. I'll probably have more thoughts on this as the days go, but one thing I did want to wrap with is just a question. And the question is, what is your aim? What is your aim? You don't have to answer it to me. You don't have to put it in the comments. This can be something for you. And when I say aim, it's sort of like a fundamental aim. Like, what are you trying to do? Like when you watch a piece of information, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to see why the other side is wrong? Are you trying to get to the truth? Actually, even if it means you have to shift your perspective, are you trying to are you trying to validate? Are you trying to invalidate? That is a question that I think is very important for all of us to answer for ourselves. Why am I seeing what I'm seeing? Because the vast majority of us, and I've been there and I'm probably still there now in some cases, but because of the positions that we already hold, we see the world through that filter. And it's sort of uncomfortable to realize that just knowing somebody's political affiliation, you can predict with high accuracy how they're going to interpret a situation of fact, like a real reality. So that's the question. What's your aim? I, for one, want to aim for truth, even if it completely dismantles everything that I know to be true. Like I didn't want that to be the case when I was leaving fundamentalist Mormonism. Like I didn't realize that it was, or when I was even exploring it, I was hoping I was going to validate it through exploring. I was like, I believe in truth. I said I believed in truth. And so I did all this studying and searching, hoping that I would find the truth and that I had it. So all my study for truth was really validation. And so again, like these are questions that nobody can do for you. That's why I also think it's bad business practice to just do media where you're telling people what is true or stating it like a statement of fact. Because you're seeing this right now. You see it on the left and the right, like statement of fact, self-defense, statement of fact, blah, blah, blah. Instead of like saying, okay, this is what I'm seeing, and sharing genuine viewpoints and letting other people draw their own conclusions. Yeah, I said it already. I'm just sort of uncomfortable with the idea that how many of us right now can make a decision of what's happening based on what we already think and feel. And why is that dangerous? Because we as a culture are becoming more and more connected to each other as one family unit. We're one family. And if we're going to solve problems, at the very bare minimum, we at least need to be in the same book, if not on the same page. It's okay to not be on the same page all the time. I think that's how we learn. And I, for one, want to be a space where we can learn, where we can have conversation. But that's so hard. It's so hard. It's so hard. It's like, it is not lost on me how hard that is, especially when we are dealing with what feels to be fundamental, basic values. And when you see somebody treating people the wrong way, it makes sense to want to react. When you see somebody harming someone, you know what? The reason I just paused, there's a story that just happened. I wasn't going to talk about it. I shared it on social, but I'm going to share here because I think there's a point to it. So I actually I started the new year by walking into a domestic dispute here in New York. And yeah, I'm going to share the whole thing here. So this is literally on January 1st, 10 days ago. So I'm taking my Christmas tree to Washington Square Park because Washington Square Park has like Christmas tree drop-offs that they turn into mulch. It smells so good, by the way. They're actually doing it today, and it smelled so good. But I'm walking to Washington Square Park, and as I'm getting closer, I hear this dispute. And this guy and this girl fighting, mostly the guy. He's this bigger guy, this smaller girl, and he's yelling and getting increasingly agitated. Enough that it definitely, I'm immediately locked onto the situation, and people that are in the area, they're avoiding this. They feel threatened enough just hearing him agitated that they're now avoiding him, crossing the street, walking around it and stuff like that. And I see that she's trying to get away from this guy. And he's following her, stepping in front of her. He tried to reach for her arm. She's like, no, leave me alone. And I'm following like, fuck, what do I do? Do I call the cops and stuff like that? Like, he's way bigger than me, but do I try to push him away? Like, here's somebody that is genuinely, seemingly threatened right now. What do I do? And then he grabs her. He grabs her purse and he doesn't let go. And that's when I step in and I said, hey, let her go. And that was sort of a pattern interrupt because he looked at me and he was like, what did you say? And I was like, let her go. Everybody gets their space. And he first said, mind your business. Mind your business. And I said, it is my business. He's like, you don't even know what's going on. And I'm like, the only thing that I know is that everybody gets their space. She just said, let me go, and you're holding on her purse. Let her go. And we're just staring at each other. And so then I say it again, let her go. Everybody gets their space. And he finally lets her go. And she starts walking away immediately. And this is where things get... I wouldn't have expected this. But the guy said something almost in a somber tone, like, you don't even know what's going on. And I just gave him a little bit of empathy. Where I was like, hey, bro, I get it. Life is complicated. And he burst out crying. And he said, it hurts. And I was like, oh, bro. So I now walk up, close on the distance, and I give this big black dude a hug. And he is just sobbing. And what I got the sense was is that they were together and stuff like that. And he's just like, yeah, this shit hurts. It hurts so bad. And he's just crying. And I'm just there with him like, I've been there, man. And then the final thing that was sort of surprising to me is he gave me one other hug and he said, thank you. And he shook my hand. And we both went our separate ways. Why do I bring that up? It is such a wild, like for me to start off 2026 that way is so wild in so many ways, but it is such a human microcosm in a couple of minutes. But I think the other reason I bring it up too is to show how we have to have human approaches to human problems. And it would have been so easy to assume, oh, right now in this situation, here's this perpetrator doing this thing to this woman. And you'd be right. Like, I was thinking I needed to call the cops. I didn't know what I was going to do. Like, if there were several guys together, it would have made sense to tackle the guy. I just don't know if that's the most helpful approach long term. And it also just shows that context changes things. Like, you at least have a deeper understanding. At first, it feels like that this is just this big, scary, violent monster. And then 30 seconds later, he's crying like a 5-year-old child in real, genuine pain. I don't know what his story was. I don't know if he got abandoned by his mom when he was 5 and his only safe place was his girl, and so he's crying, or had all this intense pain that maybe she dumped him over because she's looking out for her own self and he got triggered. You just don't know. But at the same time, what was just so beautiful and strange and surprising is seeing how he completely shifted just by having a little bit of empathy, like having a safe space to be true and to feel. He didn't want to be violent. I really feel that. That was my sense. So whatever that is, I hope that's the approach that we can start to take with some of these very real human problems that we're going to continue to face as a culture. The way we look at each other, the way we deal with people that seem threatening or look threatening or genuinely are threatening to us. We can't look at people like they're just a cartoon character or just impeding official duties and stuff like that. Like, we have to look at somebody as like a whole fucking human. Because the truth is, every single person that is here in the city, that is listening to my voice, if you've gotten here to the end, every single one of us is a whole human. And there isn't a single one of us that actually wants to be treated as though we're just fill in the blank. We're just a white guy, a black minority, like a woman, a lefty, a righty. We have so much nuance. There's so much to us. And I've been very concerned with how we have reduced ourselves to a category or a thing over the last few years instead of looking at each other as actual full humans, which we all are. So that's my little stake in the ground. You don't have to take it. But that's my view. I mean, I guess I have two aims. My aim is I want truth, and I also genuinely want what's good for people. And I think those two approaches have served me well, for what it's worth. So that's the question to end on, is like, what do you want? What's your aim for the world? So thank you so much for watching. Please hit the subscribe button. If you haven't already, please hit the like button. Yeah, we'd just love to hear any thoughts that you have in the comments. And I want to do more things like this where I'm just giving my honest take as an ex-cult member of what I'm seeing on culture. So thanks for watching, Culture Boy. I'm Calvin the Culture Boy. And yeah, stay curious. Peace.